It's kind of funny that they keep calling it Mazerunner, then some subtitles. They don't run through mazes anymore, so how come? Hello my brothers and sisters, my name is Daidarius and welcome to the review of Mazerunner Death Cure. So Mazerunner Death Cure is the third and final entry in the Mazerunner franchise. And it is based on a book in the Mazerunner book series, but I haven't read them, so I will only judge this movie as a movie and not an adaptation. So the movie picks up roughly 5 or 6 months after the former movie. Mazerunner abandoned all of her friends. Amina was kidnapped to be used as an experiment to find the cure to this virus who have wiped out the most of the human race, or as we find out, is only a third of the human race that is now uninfected. So it's not that big of a deal. It is a big of a deal. So the movie starts with that they try to find Mino and get him back, but they find out that he has been taken to the last city of mankind, where Wicked is in control of everything. So they need to get in there, get Mino, maybe even get a cure, and then get the hell out of there. And that is the movie. So what I liked about the movie is the fact that, first of all, it isn't split into 2 parts. There was a trend a few years back when you got to the final book and needed to do an adaptation of that, you had to split it into 2 because, you know, more monies. And that often resulted in a first movie which was kind of boring because it was all set up, and a second movie which was kind of shit because it was all action and there was no real setup or payoff. It was just rushed. It was either rushed or padded out too much, so it was just nah. Here, however, it is all set in one movie, and that is a big plus for me because that means that we have the whole story contained in one movie. It makes it easier to digest, to follow along, and to actually get on this last ride with these characters. I like that. I also like the fact that now these characters has kind of become adults at this point. They are no longer teenagers, they are adults, which means they do adult things. They drive around, but they are also engaged in more firearms combat. Just the whole feel of this movie is actually kind of interesting because it doesn't resolve around we need to find a cure for this virus. No, it's more humane. We need to save our friend. That's it. By doing that, the movie avoids the cliché route where we need to save the human race at all cost. Yes, that is a big deal and of course important, but we need to focus here. There are immune people out there. These characters has found their home. They just need their friend back. Now, when that is all said and done, this movie does has a few flaws. First of all, the amount of action in this movie is bare to minimum, and I don't need a big spectacle action sequence at the end because now we're gonna fight the power. But when you look at the former movies, you still need some excitement, and there are 3 scenes, maybe 4 scenes in this movie that are kind of exciting, but the most exciting scene is actually the first part of the movie, and the rest is just toned down for a more slow ride to build up these characters. And even though they're trying to build up the characters, they don't build them up that well because we have already established who they are, what their motivations are, and we don't get more depth to them. It is just a bit of exposition with their relationships to each other, and that's it. There's not that much meat on the bone here. When you slow down the pace of the movie to actually focus on characters and their interaction between each other and relationships, you need to do it right. You actually need to dig into these persons, find out who they are, find out what are the motivations, what are their fears, what are their flaws, what do they need to work on, what are they good at. Just something that we don't know yet, or something that has been hinted at but we now get more information on. Just use the time efficiently, otherwise it's just wasted time. And this movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes long, so you think There's a lot of time to build these characters more. There's a lot of time to build up suspense to make it more a thriller than an action movie. There's a lot of time to do something, but the time is wasted. We are wasting a lot of time at Wicked to see their struggle to find a cure. We are wasting a lot of time for the characters to find out how to get into the city. Especially when you look at the movie, there are presented some solutions, but it takes such a slow ride to get to. What I mean is, this movie has pace issues, and it also has a priority issue. It doesn't know what to focus on, so it focuses on everything a little instead of a few things a lot. And the final act in this movie is a huge mess, because it seems like it doesn't know what it wants. It kind of wants to play on the emotional side. You have these characters you need to say goodbye to, something happens to someone, but it hasn't invested enough time in these characters, and it doesn't try hard enough to actually make you feel for these characters in these scenes. They're just kind of there. They put some piano, sad music over it, make the characters be a bit emotional, and think that's it, but that's not how you engage an audience in an emotional scene. You need to make sure that not only does the soundtrack work, the performance work, but the editing also. Make the direction of the director obvious. If you don't do these things right, we as an audience will not feel a thing. And since it uses all of its effort to do these things but doesn't set it up properly, they just fall flat. And that is the biggest gripe of this movie. It is a lot of wasted time, half-ass setups, poor payoffs, and the final act is not that interesting. It's kind of like they looked at the Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2 and thought, that was a piece of shit, how about we do something like that, where the action climax payoff at the end was not present and all of it. Let's do that thing. And I know this might be what happened in the book, but trust me, you can't just take something from the book and just say, this is gonna work on film. You need to change things to make it work for the story that you have created for this movie, because it is an adaptation. It is not a recreation of the source material. You take what works in the source material, then you modify it to fit your narration. And they haven't done it here, which is a big bummer. Now, this might seem that I hate this movie full on because it fails on these aspects, but I don't, because even though that this movie has some priority issues and some pacing issues, it is still quite entertaining, because the main character Thomas is actually quite engaging and you actually follow him along quite well. You cheer for him because you want him to succeed, and the reason is that he is the most developed person amongst these characters. He has a lot of flaws when he makes decisions, but you follow his mindset, and we have followed him from the beginning and seen him grow as a character. Not as much as I would have liked to, because again, he hasn't moved that much since the former movie, but nonetheless, you root for him kinda and hope that he succeeds, especially because Minho is probably the best character in these movies. Not in this movie because he's underused a lot, but in the former movies he was my favorite, especially in the first one. So what you know with is you have a movie that is entertaining for sure, but there's so much lost potential and build up from the former movies, so when you get to the payoff, it's not that good of a payoff. The ending is ambiguous, and I like that it wasn't just a happy ending. There's actually some ambiguity in the end. Don't worry, it's not a spoiler. But I would have liked to have these characters' story rounded off more. You have 2 hours and 20 minutes. Use the last, let's say, 10 minutes to actually cap off these characters' story instead of just hurry to get to the credits. This movie is entertaining. This movie is fun to watch. It is at least 20 minutes too long. It has a lot of great ideas that it doesn't utilize at all. It has some explaining issues because there are some characters who come back into this series where you are pretty sure that they were capped off, and it just said, well, I survived, and you go, yeah, no, you got some explaining to do. You need to show me a flashback or something that explains why you're standing there, because I fucking saw you die, man. Just get to the explaining part. Go. That actually happens a lot of times, and in the third act, that's a bad guy in there, and there's another bad guy in there. One of the bad guys' story gets ended too abruptly, and you just go, why? And the other bad guy seems to just be crazy out of nowhere. Again, that is my issue with this movie. It needs to explain things. It needs to sit, I'm going in circles here. Okay, so even though I have these gripes with this movie, I am a fan of the former movies, especially the first one. The first one's premise was such unique and exceptional entertaining. I liked everything about it. Then you get out of that labyrinth or maze, and things kind of fell apart, but they were still entertaining to watch. If you are a fan of the former movies, you will like this movie. If you are not a fan of the former movies, you will not enjoy this movie. So I will say that Maze Runner, The Death Cure, you should watch it in cinema. Entertainment guaranteed. And some of you might go, after all that rampage on this movie, you actually gonna give it that ranking? Well, yeah, I actually think it is worth watching in cinema because I was entertained and I enjoyed the movie. At no time was I actually looking at my watch. I was not bored. I liked the movie, and if you are a fan of the former movies, then go to the cinema, watch it, enjoy it in that experience. If you aren't, don't go to the cinema, don't watch it there, of course, but that is up to you. But have you seen Maze Runner, The Death Cure, or anyone in the series? What are your thoughts on them? Whatever you think, comment below and read your thoughts. And as always, until I see you in the next video, remember to stay awesome. Bye! But still, you haven't answered my question. How can it still be called Maze Runner? They're not in the maze anymore. Is it the plot that is a maze? It's because they don't know where to go? I don't know.